Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Today's session is called Enhancing Indigenous Participation in Canada's Commitment under Agenda 2030. My name is Emily Peden, and I will be the moderator for today's session. With support from Employment and Social Development Canada, EcoCanada has been leading a project focused on enhancing Indigenous participation in meeting Canada's commitment under the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This project aims to raise awareness and support for Canada's 2030 Agenda, while also integrating Indigenous perspectives and knowledge into achieving these goals. Under this project, we have developed curriculum for our BEAHR program, courses for Indigenous and business leaders, as well as an SDG toolkit, all of which will be discussed throughout this presentation. Before we do so, however, I do have a few housekeeping points to ensure that we can all enjoy this session effectively. All participants are muted, so please check your audio settings to ensure that you can hear us properly. If you're experiencing any technical issues, please use the chat box and select questions for staff, and I will do all that I can to resolve the issue. Today's webinar will also be recorded. If you're looking for a copy of the recording, please reach out to us using the contact information that will be shown at the end of this webinar. EcoCanada is the steward for the Canadian environmental workforce across all industries. We champion the end-to-end career of an environmental professional. We not only train and certify professionals, but also help identify and address labor market gaps. Our efforts promote and drive responsible, sustainable economic growth to ensure that environmental care and best practice is priority. I would like to begin by welcoming today's speakers. Sophia Ahmed recently graduated from the University of Calgary's Environmental Science program and joined ECO last summer. As the academic coordinator, she supports ECO's post-secondary accreditation programs and training course certification. Brad Spence is a proud member of the Saddle Lake First Nation and is proud to be a traditional knowledge keeper for his community. Brad joined the EcoCanada team in 2019 as the Indigenous and Community Relations Specialist. Angelina Fedorenko is a coordinator on the Professional Services and ESG team here at ECO. She is leading the development of EcoCanada's first sustainability report. Lastly, Jose Landaverde is EcoCanada's BEAHR program coordinator. Before joining our team here at ECO, Jose was actually one of our certified BEAHR trainers, so he's incredibly knowledgeable about the program. I will now pass things over to Angelina, and I'll see you all during the question period. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, EcoCanada will now provide a traditional land acknowledgement. EcoCanada's commitment to reconciliation starts with acknowledging our honor and privilege to live, work, and play within the traditional territories of all Indigenous people, from coast to coast to coast, including First Nation, Inuit, and Métis. For today's agenda, Brad will present EcoCanada's Indigenous services, the UNDRIP framework, and the TRC framework, as well as treaty rights. Jose will then present EcoCanada's BEAHR services, the origin of BEAHR, and the strengths of BEAHR. Following, I will discuss EcoCanada's partner project with the Government of Canada, enhancing Indigenous participation in achieving Canada's commitment under Agenda 2030. Following, Sophia and I will speak about the Sustainable Development Goals in Agenda 2030, as well as the sustainability principles, measurements, and aspects. We will now delegate things over to my colleague Brad, who will present on the Indigenous services provided by EcoCanada, as well as the necessity to indigenize the SDGs and execute the UNDRIP articles in accordance with the goals.
Thank you, Angelina. Thank you, Angelina, and welcome everyone. Kansai Oke Tanitara Ambawastich. My name is Brad Spence. I am from Saddle Lake Cree First Nation. I am the Indigenous and Community Relations Specialist here at EcoCanada. And what I'm about to share with you, I just always start off by saying that these are my teachings and learnings that I have gained through my 18, 20-year career of experiences, and these are my perspectives. None of this presentation is focused on any one community or individuals, but is Indigenous as a whole. I do not speak for all Indigenous peoples. I do try to do things the best way possible and in a respectful manner. I do not mean to offend anyone. I always try to do things as respectfully as possible. I apologize now if I do offend anyone throughout the presentation. Next slide, please. So when you're working with social development goals or SDGs, you need to take these things into consideration when you're indigenize or looking at indigenization of SDGs. First off, I want to start by saying that our land, language, and our culture gives us our cultural identity of who we are. If that's in Inuit, if that's Métis, if that is First Nation people. Land, language, culture, it's all interrelated, it's all interconnected. You cannot break that apart or silo those when you're working with SDGs. It has to be all inclusive. And when I mean all inclusive, what I'm really talking about is that well-being, not only spiritually, physically, emotionally, but culturally as well. There's a saying out there, nothing about us without us. And if you're working with SDGs, I know that there are a lot of people that have fantastic or well-educated, fantastic experience and background in these areas, but they're non-Indigenous. What I would say is nothing about us without us. If you're working with SDGs, make sure you have Indigenous people involved. Now, when we're talking about the Indigenous People SDGs 2030 agenda, I just want you to keep in mind that Indigenous peoples are a small percentage of this agenda. I believe we are only 2% of this agenda. But if you'd like to learn more, please go to the Indigenous People SDGs 2030 agenda, and it will have the whole layout of the forum for 2030. Next slide, please. So I'm here today to provide just some Indigenous thoughts on SDGs or perspectives. You heard every child matters. Well, we also have a philosophy built right into the SDGs. It is no one left behind. It is with a human rights blueprint dedicated to the furthest behind first. Indigenous peoples will be the moral measurement of the SDGs of achievement and nurturers of this new relationship with Mother Earth, with nature. Now, when we're talking Indigenous and SDGs, I want you to keep in mind that there is a global Indigenous context and a national Indigenous context. The United Nations still refers to Indigenous people as stakeholders instead of a nation-to-nation relationship. However, they have identified 2 of the SDG targets specific to Indigenous peoples, and that is committing to double agricultural output of Indigenous small-scale farmers and to ensure equal access to education for Indigenous children. There is a strong commitment in 2030 agenda to empower and engage Indigenous peoples in implementing and reviewing progress in achieving their goals. I just want you to remember out of this slide that we are just a small percentage in this agenda for the 2030 agenda to empower Indigenous peoples. Next slide, please. So when we're working with social development goals, here are some things that I want you to really think of when we're talking about SDGs. We're talking about aspirational goals. For Indigenous people, if you go to the next slide, please, we really need to focus on a global context and a national context and utilizing or adopting UNDRIP, or the United Nations Declaration Rights of Indigenous Peoples, would be the beginning of the framework for that. We need to adopt and implement the articles accordingly. And this is a great opportunity for you and your organization to show which articles you have adopted or how you have adopted UNDRIP. Article 11 really talks about cultural intellect property. Now, cultural intellect property, I know how, as an Indigenous person, how we view it, but then socially, how is that interpreted through UNDRIP? Which one of these social development goals may be impacted or related to aspire to the goals? And to myself, I really related to life on land, and that's social development goal 15. Social development goal 15, as I said, are aspirational goals. But that cultural intellect property, living off the land, that is our way of life. That is who we are, as I said, about our cultural identity. Next slide, please. That is just one example that relates to one specific social development goal. In Article 12 of UNDRIP, it basically says that we have the right to manifest, practice, develop, teach our spiritual and religious traditions, our customs, our ceremonies. Now, that interpretation to me could overlap and affect multiple social development goals. Everything from good health and well-being, our mental health, our spiritual health, our physical health, to clean water for not only our water ceremonies, but for our good health of all people. Water is our medicine and water is life. That is why Indigenous people feel that we are caretakers of Mother Earth, or of the land and water. And you could see also that social development goal 14 and 15 may also be affected. So keep in mind when you are working with social development goals, UNDRIP framework may also affect multiple goals. Next slide, please. Now, when we're looking here at the Canadian context or a national context, we really come to the Truth Reconciliation Commission and their 94 calls to action and how we implement or adopt those. Now, right now, the current TRC's calls to action are broken into child welfare, education, language and culture, health, justice, reconciliation, and the Royal Proclamation. So having said that, again, you have to, just what we said about the global context and adopting UNDRIP and seeing which ones affect their social development goals on a national scale, we have to adapt the TRC framework into the social development goals as well. Now, I just showing the call to action number 18, and you could read it's really about healthcare, but it's also the interpretation of healthcare and healthcare rights. Now, to me, healthcare, you just heard me say we're from the land, that's part of our cultural identity of who we are. Again, this ties right into social development goal number 6. I know the girls, Angelina and Sophia, will be talking about elaborating more on the other SDGs, but this is how you need to framework UNDRIP and TRC to work with the social development goals. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things that I want to state, you heard me say we need a global context of Indigenous people, and then we have a national context of Indigenous people. There's not a one Band-Aid approach that fits all, or one size fits all approach. When we're talking global Indigenous, we're talking not only our Canadian, our Inuit, our Métis, our First Nation people, but we're talking Maori people, we're talking Aboriginal people of the world, Indigenous people of the world. There are too many just to put under one umbrella. And here in Canada, our national context, there are some things that really need to be outlined and thought of when you're talking about these social development goals. Just for those who do not know, our reserves for our First Nation people here in Canada are basically run by our chief and councils, but they're empowered through the Crown, which is the Governor General on behalf of the Government of Canada. Our rights are recognized and reaffirmed in our Canadian Constitution, Section 35. Also in Section 25, it guarantees and protects our rights and freedoms that have been recognized not only in the Royal Proclamation, but now exist by the way of any land claim agreement or maybe so acquire. But when you're talking treaty rights and SDGs, SDG says the right to clean water, number 6. Well, again, if that is controlled by the federal government, that's impacted to how we can support and how we can adopt the frameworks into those SDGs. Having said that, I want you to keep in mind there are global Indigenous rights, there are national Indigenous rights, and there are inherited rights. Along those lines of rights, we also have treaties and we also have agreements. How are treaties being honored within the SDGs? Now, just what I said, I have my interpretation of treaties, and I know the federal government has their interpretation of treaties, what was promised in those treaties. Are there clear definitions? And today is still a lot of misunderstandings within the treaties. Now, rights, how are our rights being incorporated into the SDGs? How does the federal government honor our rights? Again, are there clear definitions? And there are a lot of misunderstandings. So because treaties are our framework as Indigenous people, they have to complement and be adopted and be thought of, recognized, and reaffirmed when you're working into these aspirational social development goals. Next slide, please. And as I said, Sophia and Angelina will be talking about the social development goals further in depth. I just wanted to provide a quick point of view on social development goal number 8. But this is coming from an economic reconciliation point of view from our communities, our people. We're tired of managing poverty. We want to manage wealth, wealth creation, wealth management, wealth in general. But as you can see from this diagram, what we want is it to be fair for all, equal to all, accessible to all. So I just wanted to share a little bit about that community perspective. It's really coming from a place that's working or supporting not only our individuals of our community, our businesses of our community, our leadership of our communities, but as a community as a whole. Next slide, please. So having said that, as I said, all of these 17 social development goals, they're aspirational. When you're working with them, do your research, be respectful, recognize any land claims, recognize any outstanding issues that there may be, reaffirm it. But this is a great opportunity for you and your organization to show your commitment to the SDGs and to the Indigenous people. My last thought here, I would say, is in today's world is so hard to be kind to one another. Just be respectful, be kind, love each other, Having said that, next slide, please. Just to elaborate a bit more about our EcoCanada Indigenous Services, I'm going to call upon my colleague Jose to talk about the BEAHR training, but I do support the BEAHR services and the training that they provide. We also provide Indigenous training, either customized training or webinars or whatever it may be. You can see the list of services that we have to offer there. But we also do Indigenous policy development and review, and I provide technical assistance and advisory support. So if it's for Indigenous program evaluation or capacity building or technical assistance, please feel free to reach out. But that's just a little about of EcoCanada services. So at this point, I'd like to call upon my colleague Jose, and he can talk to you about the BEAHR program. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Brad. Hi, everyone. My name is Jose Landaverde, and I am the BEAHR Program Coordinator for EcoCanada. BEAHR, or the Building Environmental Aboriginal Human Resources Program, was initially created in 2001, and it officially kicked off in 2006. Since then, over 3,700 Indigenous learners from over 230 communities have successfully graduated and benefited from our training programs across Canada. It is Indigenous focused, so it was created with Indigenous input for Indigenous learners, as well as with industry leading partners and their perspectives on the programs. It is employment focused, so all of these programs, the graduates leave with a certificate of completion that is recognized by NOS across Canada, and it is focused on allowing the graduates to immediately start working at an assistant level in the workforce. It applies two-eyed seeing approach, which is inclusive of elder and traditional knowledge holder participation. We try to include as much elder and traditional knowledge, mesh it together with Western science, and these are the programs that we have. Next slide, please. We have about a dozen programs, all originating from the middle with our environmental core foundation skills. That is the foundation for the rest of these programs, including land use planning, Indigenous leadership and energy, solid waste coordinator, environmental monitoring in research and in regulatory, among other programs that are highly beneficial. They range in length from 2 weeks or up to 5 weeks each program, or can be combined to make a local environmental coordinator program, which can run approximately 17 weeks in length. Next slide, please. As you can see here, these are some pictures taken from instructors, students, and they're taken directly from their courses. It is short-term and high impact. There's a lot of material to be covered, but it is done in a relatively short amount of time, usually 6 hours a day, where the majority of it is it's actually split 50-50, 50% in the classroom learning theory, and then 50% in the actual field doing hands-on work. This allows the participants to be field ready once they graduate and allows for a perfect balance of classroom and field work that can be useful for them in their industries. Thank you very much. I think Angelina is next.
Thank you, Jose, for providing this overarching glance into EcoCanada's BEAHR program. I will now delegate our attention to EcoCanada's partner project with the Government of Canada, enhancing Indigenous participation in achieving Canada's commitment under Agenda 2030. We will begin by providing some context on the SDGs and how they started. The Millennium Summit, provided by the United Nations Millennium Declaration in September 2000, pledging member nations to a new global partnership to decrease extreme poverty and set a number of objectives with a 2015 deadline. These have been dubbed the Millennium Development Goals. After the 2015 UN's MDGs came to an end, the need for a new 15-year agenda arose, which were the SDGs, Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, was accepted by all United Nations member states in 2015. At the center of it are 17 Sustainable Development Goals that address today's social, economic, and environmental concerns. Many of the concerns of the Canadian government connect with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, such as gender equality, diversity and inclusion, environmental sustainability, as well as economic success. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development lays out the global development strategy for the next 15 years. It is seen as an improvement for Indigenous people as compared to the Millennium Development Goals, where Indigenous people were mainly invisible. If the 2030 Agenda is implemented in accordance with these principles, it has the potential to be transformative for Indigenous individuals. Indigenous people took part in the global advisory process that led to the 2030 Agenda. Albeit not all of the concerns were addressed, however, their advocacy contributed to a framework that makes direct references to Indigenous people's development concerns. These concerns are based on the following principles: universality, human rights, participation, equality, and environmental sustainability. I sourced directly from the Government of Canada website in the following project, Moving Forward Together, Canada's 2030 Agenda National Strategy. The Government of Canada is supporting the work of not-for-profit organizations, provinces and territories, municipalities, academia, the private sector, and members of Indigenous and racialized communities to make progress on the SDGs. Strengthened by a commitment to leave no one behind, Moving Forward Together, Canada's 2030 Agenda National Strategy will help build Canada, a Canada that is stronger, fairer, and more equitable for everyone. So this project, funded by the Employment and Social Development Canada, started with extensive background research and consultation with key stakeholders, such as industry experts, BEAHR trainers, as well as Indigenous leaders and communities in Canada. This will ensure that specific gaps and priorities can be addressed, so that training is designed with maximum efficiency where the specific needs of Indigenous communities are addressed. Consultation outreach was done by means of one-on-one interviews as well as online surveys. The outcomes from EcoCanada stakeholder consultations served as a framework in the development of the BEAHR module and curriculum. The curriculum addresses all 17 SDGs, which can be customized to suit regionally specific communities. EcoCanada will also consult with its external steering committee that specializes in Indigenous training development to ensure that the material is culturally relevant and effective. EcoCanada has a strong network of curriculum developers who have experience in blending traditional knowledge with Western science. Economic diversification will be promoted as a result of this project, as corporations and businesses that hire BEAHR graduates will gain skilled employees, knowledgeable about the 2030 Agenda who can promote strategy alignment. Furthermore, the creation of this module will involve partnerships between EcoCanada, subject matter experts, Indigenous communities, and government. The delivery of this module will also create partnerships between trainers and Indigenous communities. Under this project, we have developed an SDG Indigenous toolkit, which will be available for free on our website. This toolkit provides strategies and insights to support the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals into Indigenous communities and projects. Keep an eye out for our newsletter for a link to access this toolkit. So now we'll provide an overview of our curriculum that will be incorporated into our BEAHR modules. To start, here's an image of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The United Nations approved the Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the Global Goals, in 2015 as a global call to action to eradicate poverty, safeguard the environment, and guarantee by that 2030 all people enjoy peace and prosperity. The most generally accepted definition of sustainability comes from the United Nations, which defines it as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising future generations to meet their own needs. The 17 SDGs are interconnected, whereas actions in one area will have an impact on outcomes in others, and that development must balance social, economic, and environmental sustainability. To measure success in achieving the goals, you need indicators and ways to gauge your progress. Sustainability indicators are measurable, environmental, economic, or social aspects of any project or operation. Any sustainability indicator should have the following features defined by the SMART acronym. The S, for the specific indicator, should target a specific area of interest for the analysis. It identifies what, when, or how associated with the project or operation. The M, or otherwise known as the measurable indicator, should be capable of being counted, compiled, analyzed, or tested so that a data set can be collected and assessed to determine the degree of success. The achievable indicator should have a clear performance target that is easily understandable and may be realistically achieved at a project. The relevant indicator should be selected such that it has a meaningful contribution to the overall goal or strategy associated with the project. The timely indicator should be achieved within an appropriate time frame and/or subjected to the time constraints of the project. So, as previously mentioned, the 17 SDGs encompass more than the environment or the planet. Sustainability is a holistic term that also addresses social and economic concerns. Here we have the 17 SDGs divided into 4 groupings: the economic, social, and environmental groups, as well as SDG 17, Partnership for the Goals. I will now hand things over to Sophia, where she will provide more detail about the 17 SDGs.
Hi everyone, my name is Sophia and I am an academic coordinator with EcoCanada's Professional Services and ESG team. So now we're going to go a little more in depth into the different SDGs, and we will start with the economic aspects of sustainability. So Goal 1 focuses on implementing policies to reduce poverty, promote fair access to resources, and strengthen people's resilience to all types of catastrophes. Indigenous peoples have experienced greater rates of poverty because of colonialism. Indigenous peoples in Canada and worldwide are looking for ways to combat poverty in their lives through tactics, collaborations, programs, and services. The 2030 Agenda targets under this goal acknowledge the importance of equal rights to economic resources, as well as fair sharing of benefits derived from genetic resources and traditional knowledge. Therefore, achievement of this goal can be connected to enabling Indigenous people to regain control of their land, territories, and resources. Indigenous communities can look into Canada's first poverty reduction strategy options, which builds on the Government of Canada's existing programs, such as its first national housing strategy. One example under the strategy is the New Hope Nation's Tiny Homes project in BC, providing innovative, energy-efficient, affordable rental housing. Individuals can also look into what potential or resources their community can offer them and plan to use the support and resources to build entrepreneurial opportunities. The following SDGs are also part of the economic aspects of sustainability. So Goal 9 is to build resilient infrastructure, promote sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. It addresses that every thriving community relies on a well-functioning and robust infrastructure. Goal 11 is to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. It addresses that we need to develop modern, sustainable cities to accommodate everyone. Goal 7 is to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy. Solar, wind, hydropower, geothermal, and biofuels are some of the renewable energy sources available in the environment. Currently, Natural Resources Canada, under the Clean Energy for Rural and Remote Communities program, is working with rural and isolated Indigenous communities to build innovative, sustainable energy projects. This will help them replace fossil fuels, enhance reconciliation and self-determination, and battle climate change. So this goal is strongly interconnected with SDG 13, climate action. And we also have goal 8, which Brad had mentioned earlier in the presentation, and it is to promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, and full and productive employment and decent work for all. There are different provincial and federal funds available to support the Indigenous people that want to provide their communities decent work and economic growth, such as the Indigenous Services Canada's Indigenous Community Business Fund. And this supports community-owned businesses that were affected by COVID-19. I will now present on the social aspects of sustainability. Goal 2 is to end hunger, achieve food security, improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. This goal is interconnected to other goals as food insecurity takes a substantial toll on physical and mental health, which is connected to Goal 3, health and well-being, and is also reliant on Goal 1, no poverty. A specific target that was identified in the 2030 agenda for this goal is to double the agricultural output of Indigenous small-scale farmers. There is emphasis on promoting sustainable agricultural practices. The UN and the Canadian government have identified several steps for tackling this goal, one of which includes utilizing local potential to develop sustainable greenhouses and farming for communities. For example, through the Climate Change Preparedness in the North program, the Government of Canada funded Tron-Dek-Wichin First Nations 4-season greenhouse project in the Yukon Territory. This goal is also connected to Goal 13, climate action. And similar to Goal 1, individuals can look into what potential or resources their community can offer them and plan to use the support and resources to build entrepreneurial opportunities. Goal 5 is to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. This goal is of particular relevance to Indigenous communities due to the national human rights crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. If interested, you can get more information and resources on this issue through the Native Women's Association of Canada's website. Canada also started the Federal Pathway, which outlines the Government of Canada's commitments to end violence against Indigenous women and girls. And the government will work with Indigenous partners to develop an implementation plan. So Goal 4 is quality education. A specific target identified under this goal in the 2030 agenda is to ensure equal access to education for Indigenous children. Inclusive and quality education should be culturally sensitive, respecting language diversity, education in mother tongue, and inclusion of traditional knowledge. Canada's BEAHR program that Jose had touched on earlier is one example to show how we can work towards achieving this goal. It not only provides education for Indigenous people, but also results in employment and economic growth, which is connected to Goal 8. The education of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students is a constitutional obligation of the federal, provincial, and territorial governments in Canada. While the federal government is responsible for the education of students on First Nations reserves, provincial and territorial public education systems are responsible for the education of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students who attend schools off reserve. The following SDGs are also part of the social aspects of sustainability. Goal 6 is to ensure availability of and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Access to sufficient, affordable, and safe drinking water and adequate sanitation is easy for most Canadians, but is not true for many Indigenous communities. Indigenous Services Canada, or ISC, financially supports public on-reserve water and wastewater systems, and so far 78% of long-term drinking water advisories have been lifted since 2015. First Nations owners of private water and wastewater systems can access protocols and guidelines developed by the ISC, and the ISC may provide technical advice upon request. Goal 3 is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all. The First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people of Canada are among the most vulnerable to infectious illnesses. Indigenous people living in remote and fly-in only areas of the country are especially susceptible. Indigenous communities can work closely with federal government and local government and municipalities to allocate enough funds to build the health infrastructures that are needed, such as through the ISC's Health Facilities Program. They also have access to the Indigenous Community Support Fund, which provides support for projects that prevent, prepare, and respond to the spread of COVID-19 within their communities. We have Goal 10, which is to reduce inequality within and among countries. Indigenous peoples in Canada have a lengthy history of colonization that has pushed them to the margins of society, the economy, and politics. One thing Canada plans to do is eliminate discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, and promote appropriate legislation, policies, and action in this regard. And then we have Goal 16, which addresses human rights and the manner in which political and legal institutions can safeguard them. The Government of Canada has introduced the Indigenous Justice Program to support Indigenous community-based justice programs that offer alternatives to mainstream justice processes. Through this, Indigenous communities can access funding for their community-based justice programs. So now we will bring our attention to the environmental aspects of sustainability, which we saw were already quite interconnected to some of the economic and social aspects. Climate change poses a clear and present danger to our entire civilization. The consequences are already evident and will be disastrous unless we act quickly. We can make the necessary adjustments to safeguard the Earth via education, innovation, and adherence to our climate obligations. These developments also present significant opportunity to update our infrastructure, which will result in the creation of new employment and increased global prosperity. Many of the SDGs surrounding environmental sustainability align with the priorities of Indigenous people in the protection of the ecosystems and biodiversity of their lands and homes. Northern Indigenous communities are particularly affected due to climate change. For example, delays in the formation of ice roads interfere with getting supplies and resources to these communities. And we've seen from Goal 2, Zero Hunger, greenhouses are one way to combat some of these challenges. Canada's climate plan includes a goal of attaining net zero emissions by 2050, growing a low carbon economy, and building resilience to a changing climate. For example, to support meeting these targets, Eco-Canada, with support from the Government of Canada, is working on a project that will be promoting awareness of zero-emission vehicles to Indigenous individuals and communities. The following SDGs are also part of the environmental aspects of sustainability. We have Goal 14, which is to conserve and sustainably use the ocean, sea, and marine resources for sustainable development. Goal 15, which is to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. And we have Goal 12, ensure sustainable production and consumption patterns. One of the targets of the 2030 Agenda under Goal 12 is to increase awareness of lifestyles in harmony with nature. Through the integration of traditional knowledge into formal education, Indigenous people could help contribute to this goal. Therefore, this ties in closely with SDG 4, quality education. Indigenous communities can also contribute to the environmental goals through projects that focus on promoting sustainable use of the land and recycling and waste management projects. Lastly, we have SDG 17, Partnership for the Goals. Goal 17 is to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. Investment supports and building of strong partnerships are really key to meeting our SDGs. So this could mean partnerships between communities or between allies and Indigenous peoples. For example, through partnerships, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that the TRC, which Brad had touched on earlier, was one step to improving relationships. All right, so that concludes our webinar. Before we end things off, though, I just want to reiterate that the purpose of this project and curriculum development is to serve as foundational knowledge for Indigenous people to work towards and integrate projects in their communities that encompass one or more of the SDGs. Under the BEAHR program, the course's focus and anticipated outcomes will be customized to a community's specific needs, giving them the right tools and knowledge to facilitate and manage successful projects that align to the 2030 agenda. So now I'll hand things off to Emily and we'll open up for any questions.
Great. Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much, Sophia, Angelina, Brad, and Jose for the great presentation. Speakers, if you're able to maybe unmute or put your cameras on, that would be great. We've had some questions come through and then I can relay them over to you all. Perfect. Thanks, everyone. So our first question here is for Brad. So Brad, someone has asked, well, these goals are aspirational. Are they still worth pursuing, or are they something that we should be starting at on a smaller level?
I think they're still worth pursuing. Again, if the United Nations, if this is their global initiative, I think it is fantastic that they are trying to involve in global Indigenous people in these social development goals. If we break that down, like we said, from a global context to a national context, we could even go down further into a community context, even as a organizational initiative. Having said that, anytime that we could have our input or our voice as part of something, I think that's valuable. The challenge becomes just what we said, we're only like 2 or 4% of that Indigenous 2030 agenda. It's talking all the right things, but we're only a small percentage of actual engagement or collaboration on it. So that becomes the challenges. But I think at any level, it's worthwhile for us to be involved.
Great. Thank you, Brad. The next question looks like it might be for Jose and others. I know there are a few of us involved in this, but someone is just looking for more information on the zero emissions vehicle projects and how that integrates and engages with Indigenous communities as well.
That's a great question, and that is actually one of my favorite projects that I'm working on right now. It's a zero emissions vehicle awareness initiative. So the goal of all of this is to actually raise the benefits of switching to zero emission vehicles versus staying on diesel in the far north regions. The way that this could benefit from it and tie in is like this goes to achieve that goal of reducing emissions and implementing greener technology and energies. It's an ongoing project, and I'm more than happy to share more information as I'm allowed to share it actually, because I'm not allowed to share too much because it hasn't been completely advertised, but I'll be more than happy to reach out on a one-on-one basis if you are interested.
Great, thank you, Jose. And another question we had might be for you as well, Jose. And someone is asking what the students learn in the core BEAHR module, and is that kind of the principal module that BEAHR students complete in order to participate in the program?
The core is the foundation of all of these BEAHR courses. Majority of our students, or majority of our programs are actually aimed towards a minimum of a grade 10 education, some at a minimum of a grade 8 education. What the core program does, it actually elevates everyone to the same starting point, and that allows everyone to reach out and learn from any of the other, like contaminated sites, remediation courses. What this does, it allows simple teachings to bring everybody up to the same level, so that further deeper talks, i.e. The actual regulatory wordings, they're more capable of understanding them. So it's essentially a prerequisite for every other course, so that once they're in the official course, they're all on the same page and questions are kept to a minimum.
Great, thanks for providing that overview, Jose. Brad, I have another one I think might be towards you. So we have a participant asking about what we can do now to heal our land from the trauma from past developments that was approved by the government. They're asking, is there funding available for healing the land with traditional knowledge that would be supported by Western teaching and political elected chiefs?
Great question. Thank you. First off, as an Indigenous person, we could always turn to our ceremonies, our culture, our spirituality. Those are things that we can do, we can control. Having said that, I would really encourage you to monitor, watch the Government of Canada environmental website to see if and when those funding opportunities do go on. Funding streams are always changing and always evolving. I would highly recommend that you continue to monitor that site the best that you can, and not only through Government of Canada, but possibly through like either NRCan, Natural Resource Canada. They might possibly have some, or even provincially, but that would be up to you to do that due diligence to monitor their sites to find those funding opportunities.
Great, thank you for that information, Brad. Our next question might maybe be for Sophia and Angelina, but of course others please weigh in. So a participant is asking if certain SDGs might be more relevant to Indigenous communities, or if it might vary based on the community and their specific needs. I ask you both because I know you've done a lot of research into the SDGs themselves, so you might be the most familiar, perhaps.
I can start on that, and then Angelina, just feel free to chip in. So yeah, definitely, I think that not all 17 SDGs will be applicable to every First Nation community, and so that's why through the BEAHR curriculum, before we go out and teach this curriculum, we would be working with the communities and BEAHR instructors to determine which SDGs are most relevant, like those that rely more heavily on water resources and fishing might not have all the other environmental ones be applicable, or some of the social ones be applicable. And so it's really up to them to decide how they want to go forward with it.
Yeah, just to weigh in a little bit, it is true. It really depends on the community. It depends on the culture. It depends on the region. And based on our past research and with a hardworking team that we have here, we will ensure that the curriculum will be modeled after every community, so it can easily be changed and to fit in what the community needs are.
Great, thanks so much, Sophia and Angelina. Another question coming through was just for contact information. Perhaps I'll respond. So we've just put up our general email on here. However, if you have any specific questions for any of us, please send them through to this general email and they will be relayed to us and then we will respond to you directly. Jose would be your contact. They're asking specifically for more information on the BEAHR program. So I think unless anyone has anything else that they would like to put in the chat box, that wraps it up in terms of questions. But I would just like to take a moment to thank again Sophia, Jose, Angelina, and Brad for the great and informative presentation. And of course, to all our participants and everyone that joined us this afternoon or morning, I guess it depends where you are in Canada today. We really appreciate your interest. We want to reiterate again that this is, a great foundation piece for looking into the SDGs, but we're always open to collaboration and continuing to develop this project. So please don't hesitate to reach out with any feedback, information, or any times that you would like to kind of collaborate with us. Thank you so much, everyone, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.